Hey, people of the internet, welcome back to Untier Talk. It's the most useful podcast on the entire web for people who want to keep up with PU. So all three of you, it's really useful. I'm here for you. Joining me today, we got our regular co-host Hajad.
Yo, what's up?
And I am, of course, Megazard, and we're also joined by two special guests because we're gonna have a big discussion today. TJ, what's up?
What's up? Blueface, baby. Yeah.
And Specs.
Hi. Thank you for having me on again.
Hell yeah, dude. You only get on the foursomes, don't you? Like, I think the only other time we had you on was with Keo, right?
Wait, did you just say foursome?
That's how we get down.
You did just say foursome, didn't you?
That's the technical term. Okay. So we have we got a Houndoom suspect going on right now. I am mixed, waiting to develop my opinion, leaning ban. Specs is also mixed, leaning no ban. And then we have Hajad and TJ, who are like, TJ is super anti-ban, Hajad is super pro-ban, and basically they're just going to be screaming at each other for the next hour. Guys, let's get this bread.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
No, but seriously, Houndoom suspect. That's gonna be the topic. Does one of you want to start off? Because I know both of you.
Go for it.
Well, to be honest, I said most of my points in the post that you can check in the nasty blog, the now.
The NP thread, yeah, but just like a brief summary before we actually get to debating the points, just because I wouldn't assume people have read that like massive brick wall of text.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I can't really say a brief. I can't brief summary it because it's so long.
Just the main points. That's all you need.
Okay, so Houndoom doesn't have switch in the high ranks. If you want to get 100% switch into it, you'd have to go down to like the E ranks, the C ranks, really low down, like basically too low down. And then I wasn't convinced that the offensive counterplay was at all effective enough. So let's say if you wanted to revenge kill it with Hitmonchan or a Gerda, like I'd say that the necessity there was getting up stealth rocks. And in my experience, getting up stealth rocks was actually harder than most people take for granted, especially on like ladder. Like it was more than trivial to just keep stealth rocks off the field with deep fox support. That and the fact that pursuit, the unnerved pursuit set, is extremely difficult to play against, given that you're just essentially like you're just clicking like you're threatening out all of the mons, and then you just click the
pursuit.
You click the pursuit, the unnerved pursuit, and then you ignore the call the berry. That basically invalidates all the psychics and the ghost types if you wanted to trap them, for example. So that's a concern. Yeah. All
right. So main points. It's like pretty much impossible to safely switch into.
Read the post.
Okay, but let me. All right.
We've all read the post here, so.
Okay.
Read the post
so,
and then come back.
Hajad, shut up. Main points. All right. It's very hard to switch into, and offensive counterplay kind of dubious. And then you got that set diversity. I'm gonna hard disagree on the pursuit set being like super problematic, but we'll get there. That's not super important. And then TJ, if you want to briefly not respond yet, just like summarize your feelings on Houndoom as to why it's not broken before we start actually hitting the cross points. I want to make sure we got a good basis, you know.
So in my experience, I guess, I just find it kind of like inconsistent, I guess. Like, and I feel like it's pretty easy to pressure via priority, entry hazards and like just faster things. Like, I understand it's like kind of like hard to switch into, and like it does in that regard put like a strain on team building. But like if you compare that to other wall breakers, like I guess like Semi-Seer or like just anything else remotely good, it's not really that bad. Like I think another point was like it's what's it called? What is it?
Frail?
Yeah, super frail compared to like High War and like Mag and Mortar. Like I saw people like trying to like say well, if we ban those two, like what sets them apart from Hamdu? And I think just being like super frail, and honestly, I think it's dark typing. Like it gives it like some positive attributes, but then like that whole being weak to like fucking Mach Punch and shit is really like annoying too. I mean, Pyro was also weak to Mach Punch and shit, but it wasn't like as frail as Hamdu.
All right, so
and I feel like in this meta, like it's more like okay in Pyro meta,
Mach Punchers weren't as
kind of hard to like. I don't know. I feel like it was just kind of hard to like keep up that offensive pressure because Pyro was like so fast initially, and it was like so good at like wall breaking. But like with Doom, it's a little slower and definitely isn't as hard to revenge kill.
Yeah. Okay. So, basic points. It's pretty much just the split between like, is it really that hard to revenge kill? Is it really necessarily that hard to keep the pressure up on? I will disagree that Doom is not notably slower than Pyro. It's very obvious the speed tiers aren't super close. Again, we'll get there. I think those are really like the big picture points. Did we drop anything, Specs?
No. I think I share a lot of like points just differently between you guys.
Yeah, because it really comes down to like needing to tell exactly how easy this thing is to pressure, how easy it is for your average team to take on Houndoom. And a lot of that just comes with experience and the way you fuel the tier, the way you team build, things like that. That doesn't mean, obviously, you can't discuss it, because there's definitely a lot of objective points to be made about how strong Houndoom is. I guess I'd like to start off by just jumping into the Cobra Pursuit thing, because I think that is the most overhyped ban point. Good lord. My experience with Cobra Pursuit is very mediocre. It is fine. There's nothing wrong with the set, and it totally does trap. I'm sorry, Unnerve Pursuit, not Cobra Pursuit. It traps the Colberry Psychus. You can do like 15 Mesprit, to trap the Claydol as they're switching out, whatever, fine. I don't really see any reason why that's broken. I think it's the fine set that can do some team support, but I don't see any reason why it's not something that the tier could adapt to if the rest of Houndoom was balanced and or if like only that set was in the tier. I have no clue what the issue is there.
Should I let me make my counter argument to that point, and that's okay. As a support one, you're not really getting the spotlight because it's sort of like the one kill that Houndoom gets is more important than the rest of the kills that the other team or the team would get like naturally. Okay, so like how I think about it is more like how effective is it at pursuit trapping the psychics and ghosts in the tiers, which are the things that you're going to mainly be trapping with Houndoom. Let's be honest, because those are the things that mainly use the Cobble Berry, so that Unnerve has like an advantage. Like you have an advantage over Skunk with Unnerve, so you're better at trapping ghosts and psychics. So like, what's the impact of having those psychics and ghosts put under that pressure? Okay, so if you look at it on an individual basis on each of the ghosts and each of the psychics, they all get trapped and they get dealt a massive amount of damage. So what's the influence of this? It means that the main checks that people will use the fighting types will have to shift away from the standard Mesprit plus Frostlass core, or like Mesprit plus X, Frostlass, can't be your main primate check, for example, or you can't use Jellicent maybe.
All right, let me just head you off of the pass here really quick, because yeah, it does change how we'd need to check fighting types. I just don't see that as an inherently broken thing. It's not like those are only fighting type checks. It's not like there aren't ways Houndoom also makes fighting types arguably worse. I really do think Houndoom does not purely facilitate fighting types in both checking it and pursuit trapping their counters, but also in the way that it encourages more. It also really benefits fighting type counterplay at the same time. I just don't really see it.
I disagree with that, mainly because the fighting type checks. I tried to make a list with many earlier. We were discussing this of the fighting type check that doesn't really get impeded by pursuit. We managed to come up with a list of about 3 or 4, I'd say, and that's Pom Pom, Victory Bell, Silvally Poison, and a couple other like half checks, I guess you can call them, like Silvally Fairy. I guess you can call it a fighting check. Shinotic, fighting check, yeah, but that one's pretty bad. They're both pretty bad at checking fighting types. And Shinotic's just bad. But yeah, those are the then if you don't want to be affected by Houndoom in terms of having a fighting check, you're then limited to about 2 to 3 options, of which the third one probably isn't that good. It's going to be pressured doing other stuff. Like you'd want a secondary fighting check if you were just running Silvally Poison. But yeah, that's the like the crux of it. Like you essentially centralize the meta more than like the set itself being broken. I don't think. Yeah, okay, you could probably argue that it isn't, but you centralize the meta towards 2 or 3 fighting type checks, and that is what is kind of a bit worrying that you can do that, and then like those fighting checks, what happens when you don't use them? Houndoom traps it, so it's like.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we disagree on like how much you could adapt and pick up more fighting checks, because that list is definitely smaller than one I'd make.
What would you put on it?
Actually,
would you add like Sableye?
I do not remember every mon you've said, but Quagsire, Sableye, for sure, yeah, Sableye. I really do think people can work with more recovery sets of Quillfish. I think like Pain Split stuff definitely could have picked up. I don't know if Tangela was on there. Blossom, to be perfectly honest. I also like genuinely like Altaria in this meta. I know you hate him, but Scyther's kind of there a little bit. Anyway, that's just a little back and forth on the pursuit side, but I don't think we're gonna go farther here. And I assume TJ has been waiting to toss out some counter arguments. So
what's it called? I actually agree with him. I think that is the best set. Like that's like the only set in my opinion that is like, I guess, troublesome. I guess along with the spec set as well, because that one just kind of clicks overheat once and then spams Dark Pulse the rest of the game. But yeah, I think the Nerve Pursuit set is definitely the best, just because like you're able to trap things like Mesprit, Frostlass, Claydol, and then like you open the door for like your fighting type partners, which is like pretty good. And nothing really in the tier does that. I don't know if that's inherently a bad thing, but I definitely think that's probably one of the best sets. What do you think, Specs?
I haven't had too much issue with the Unnerved Pursuit set. Like, I think on paper it looks really bad because of the meta we've kind of come into with like Frostlass and Mesprit kind of being on a ton of teams. So when we have something come down like this that threatens both of them, and it ignores like the omnipresent Colbert mess, I think people kind of panic. But I think over time we can adapt a bit more than what people are suggesting.
Yeah. I mean, because people are just saying like shit like Simisear does the same thing, but it just doesn't like trap those bonds. Like it pressures your Mesprit, Frostlass teams, pressures the Pom Pom, Quaggle, with that Alolan Sandslash teams. So that's another argument.
I think that the Pursuit on Nerve set, like you said, is probably the most troublesome because of how it just affects the meta we've come into. But I don't think it's like broken or unhealthy or anything. But I mean, I'm open to thinking so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's broken. I just think it's probably the best set.
Yeah,
it's scary, but its scariness is predicated on like, is your Mesprit taking 50%? Is your Frostlass, dying as it gets up 2 spikes? Is that the end of the world?
Yeah,
well, many people would argue that it would be the end of the world if it was supporting like a girder. Like, you can't afford to take 50% on a Mesprit in that case. Like, your job in that case is just to And then if you don't want to switch in your Mesprit to like avoid taking Pursuit at all costs, what you'll end up doing is essentially freezing out half your team, or like a big element of your team. So you would never be able to get up Stealth Rocks if you had that. You wouldn't be able to use it as a pivot or like use it to check Gerda in the immediate future. You'd have to try and like finesse around it or something. So I can understand why people think Pursuit isn't broken, because it isn't as inherently threatening. Like, you don't just lose the game. If like Houndoom clicks Pursuit and you take 50% or 60% on your Mesprit, you don't inherently just lose the game. Like, you still have outs and team building strategies and what have you to get out. But my issue from that set comes with like the centralization. Like, if you want to be safe, truly safe from like Gerda, now it's not just a question of having like a psychic type that can take the knockoff. It's now about having a psychic type that can take the knockoff, or like a mon that can take the knockoff, and also, you know, not be threatened too harshly by the Pursuit of Houndoom, which is where I'm getting sort of the broken elements coming from.
I mean, the meta can just adapt for like Zara said, we have Sableye, we have like Tangela switching to those fighting types. So like, I mean,
yeah, but then, well, if you have a Houndoom, for example, you're pressuring those switch-ins more heavily. So like, if you're using a Sableye or a Hound or a Tangela, that's fodder for Houndoom just as much as that's the easiest fodder for Houndoom.
And that's the thing, like,
so it's like
you can run Pursuit on any average set, and that's just not a big deal to drop a move for like, if you're dropping Nasty Plot and you just want to run offensive Houndoom, Pursuit is also kind of free. Perhaps I just don't use Mesprit as like your primary girder / fighting check enough, because I've always felt that Mesprit's always like, I've always felt that it fits best on teams that aren't relying on Mesprit to stay around a long time. Like, you want to rock, you want to take big hits and you turn out, and you want a Healing Wish. And I don't see it as like a primary defensive stop. So if it gets trapped, like, yeah, you know, Frostlass is supposed to spike and be frail and die, and if it gets trapped, well, yeah, that's not meant to be around a long time. So I think just the way I kind of interact with fighting checks is probably real different there.
And I've seen people say that like Skuntank traps those mons for fighting types as well. So like,
I disagree with that. I think Skuntank is it's one of those Pokemon where, yeah, sure, it checks or it Pursuit traps Mesprit, but the reward for clicking Pursuit on a Mesprit is far lower. And at the end of the turn, Mesprit knows that it can just click U-turn and get the momentum. So like, let's say you Pursuit on the Mesprit, right? And you U-turn. You know you have to click Pursuit another time and get it in that exact same scenario another time for it to be truly have worked, right? Whereas Mesprit can U-turn out that one time, go into a Lycanroc or what have you, Regirock, whatever, right? It can then threaten the Skuntank. So with Houndoom, when you get it into a scenario where it's 1v1, Mesprit versus Houndoom, the likelihood that you click U-turn on that turn, unless you 100% know you've seen the team before it's Pursuit set, you're always going to be switching out. There's no other choice for you there. Like, otherwise, you're risking taking a Dark Pulse, Stuck in EMZ, Dark Pulse, Spexes, and Spec Sets, and all that type of stuff. So you don't want to be staying in at all. Like, you can't even afford to U-turn, which is where Houndoom, as a Pursuit trapper, like, elevates itself above Skuntank, because suddenly there's no opportunity for Mez to get the momentum at the end of the turn. It's always switching out, and it's always taking the 60% if you get it into that 1v1 scenario, which isn't that difficult, to be honest. Like, especially if it's a Stealth Rock Mesprit, like, you just come in on the Stealth Rocks, and if they don't want to bring it in, they don't get Stealth Rocks. Like, that's a pretty simple, exchange, I guess.
It almost sounds like we're too reliant on Mesprit a little bit. Like, not that we
I agree.
had to not be in the past, because we haven't had something like Houndoom where a nerf Pursuit threatened it so much. But it may be now we're kind of realizing that, hey, you know, maybe we can't be using this as much as like we used to anymore. And I don't know if that's like a broken element or if it's just something that we need to deal with, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe it's like, okay, not that it would be good for the tier necessarily for there to be less Mesprit, but I feel like it wouldn't be a bad thing to try to use less of it and, adapt a little bit.
Yeah. Ultimately, again, I think if this was the only set, if this pursuit was the only thing we had to worry about, I do think we would get used to it. But of course, there's a lot more scary stuff to Houndoom. So, who wants to throw out another point?
I threw my points. I'm actually kind of
like a specific counter argument to something the other said. I don't care who does it. I don't care which one we jump onto.
Let's see what Specs has to say.
Sure.
Sure. So, H-Chad, I think you said so a lot of people have been making points about offensive pressuring Houndoom, and I think you said it's not that great. Like the things that can offensive pressure it. I'm interested to see what you mean by that. I don't really have a counterpoint right now, but yeah.
My main opposition to the whole offensive pressure thing is that even though I wasn't going into the suspect test, I was more so concerned about the team building aspects to Houndoom, more so than the playing aspects. So I was sort of on board with the whole offensive pressure thing. Like maybe if it is easy to pressure offensively, maybe Houndoom would become less of a dictatorial threat that I was portraying. So basically in practice, what I didn't appreciate enough was that rocks aren't ever present. And that's the crux of my argument that makes offensive pressure versus Houndoom difficult. Because if you support Houndoom with a good defog core or a rapid spinner plus a defogger or even just a defogger on its own, it's for some point in that game will have the opportunity to come in at the start of the game where there's no stealth rocks and towards the middle of the game where there's defog support being used so that it can come in freely and what have you. And then the offensive pressure Pokemon themselves, the things that actually check Houndoom in the game, either don't revenge kill it effectively enough, or if they do revenge kill it effectively, it's limited to a band of 2, 3. Well, that's a bit hyperbolic. I would say about 5 or 6 Pokemon that can revenge kill Houndoom 100% of the time in any scenario. And basically, if you have a meta which revolves around 5, it's the same argument sort of with Pursuit, where if you have a meta revolving around another 5 or 6 Pokemon to revenge kill Houndoom at all costs, that can become stale really quickly.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, well, wouldn't you say that the things that can offensively pressure Houndoom, outside of Stealth Rocks and all that, the Pokemon, wouldn't you say that they're already kind of in the meta?
Yeah, I would say, okay, so here's the thing with team building. The thing I like about, the thing that makes team building fun is the fact that you can slap a core on a team, right? A defensive core and what have you, and then have the space because that offensive core is viable, or defensive core, whatever core that you're trying to use. They have the space to just use Pokemon that don't really have utility. So, for example, if I wanted to use an Ursaring, that's actually quite difficult in the current meta that we're trying to build around to try and put it off, because it doesn't really do anything. It's just there to be a breaker, right? So in the meta that you're proposing with a Houndoom, and then you have to use these set Houndoom checks, there is less room to be creative and then diverse. You also have to be there's a meta, and then there's anti-meta, which is, worse than the meta team, but also better versus that better team. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
so
there are...
oh, sorry, you go.
I was going to say, there are specific things that are in the meta and revenge kill Houndoom, but I would say at the same time, they're all kind of weird mons that are. There's the Scarfers that have to lock themselves into moves, which is never a fun time. I think that's pretty obvious. There's Lycanroc, which has always been really good, but also annoyingly hit or miss with those matchups. And then there's a couple others. Alolan Raichu, also kind of rare, doesn't love Houndoom's presence. Alolan Dugtrio, also just a weird thing to fit on teams. And it doesn't really get better from there. So I like, to me, the biggest meta mons that really revenge kill Houndoom are your Lycanroc and your Scarfers, and I don't love that. That to me is my biggest issue with Houndoom. And I also think people who say it's easier to handle revenge kill than Pyroar, I don't see that at all. Perhaps I played too much of Pyroar when we still had Archeops in the tier, but like Houndoom has a really comparable speed tier. Pyroar obviously faster, but there are very few relevant mons that outspeed Houndoom and not Pyroar. There's Speed Time with 95s. There's Swanna.
So, yeah.
There's Focus Blast Simisear.
I'll just give you a rundown because I'm looking at this.
I'm kind of out of.
Right
oh, also you can
the things.
use Power Gem Alolan Persian. If we're counting that as Houndoom, check Power Gem Alolan Persian. You're a revenge killer right there.
That sounds lit. Just to give a quick rundown for those of you who don't know, the speed difference between Houndoom and Pyroar is 317 to 342, and the Pokemon, the specific Pokemon that are in that tier are like Swanna. I'm looking at the speed tier now. Swanna, Basculin.
Oh, Scyther.
Gorgeist, Simisage, Simisear.
Manectric as well.
All the monkeys.
Yeah,
the Scyther, and Manectric.
Manectric, Scyther, and Swanna being the only being like the most relevant things. That's not a big deal. Sorry.
Pyroar being faster also allowed it to run a better Scarf set to offset the weakness to like Primeape and all that.
Okay, but like that's
but
a different the Scarf set was not the work.
It wasn't that great on the latter part of Pyroar meta, but so it's more like we have checks and they're half decent, but like you don't want the meta to be centralized around those checks, rather than like the Pokemon being like bad per se.
Well, it's a bit of both, to be honest. It's a bit of both, honestly, because the checks themselves kind of suck. Like, if you're talking about revenge kill via Mark Punch, we're talking about Gerda, which honestly I've used Doom to check Gerda more than the other way around.
Okay, we've seen those ladder games. Your exploits versus Krokorok are not.
That doesn't make sense.
Well, here's the thing: it's like if you, let's say a team has a fire resist and you kill the fire resist with Dark Pulse or whatever, and then they use Gerda then as the check. If you get Houndoom again 1v1 and you either have the Fire MZ or you have Specs Overheat, you check the Gerda. Like Gerda doesn't threaten you after Stealth Rocks.
I guess. I just wouldn't call it like you checking it necessarily. It's more just like, oh, you don't kill me right now. So
yeah. Okay. We can like Gerda's a check. I guess you could put it there as a check. Like I don't really care about it.
It's a weak check.
Practice, it's not. It's a weak check. We have Chan, which is a fair point. Like you can revenge kill with Chan. We have Caracosta, which is your Aqua Jet coming into play. Lycanroc, which is your Cell Rock. Priority revenge killing.
Vacuum Wave.
Vacuum Wave does not do anything. I would say
Vacuum Wave Poliwrath is just bad. I'm sorry. It's not a good. Yeah. It's not good. You can mention it, but it is really not a relevant thing.
Just like you don't even need to click Vacuum. I was just trying to list my users. But you don't even need Vacuum Wave. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd say if you're using Poliwrath, you're using it more to check every set apart from the Solar Beam set, that's the main reason I think you could use Poliwrath, not for Vacuum Wave. So I won't include that. But those are your four, I would say those are four main priority users. Would you guys be happy saying that those are the four main ways that you'd revenge kill it?
Via priority, yeah.
Via priority, yeah. Because here's the thing, like Kabutops, the main set now isn't the SD set. You would run like Caracosta if you wanted to use an SD Kabutops. So
it's mainly Scarf.
So yeah, mainly Scarf Kabutops. Floatzel don't tend to run Aqua Jet. So on physical sets, unless I wouldn't even run Aqua Jet on Bulk Up, to be honest. You'd run like Ice Punch to hit.
Band does room types. For Aqua Jet.
But it runs Switcheroo, doesn't it? It has like Break, Liquidation, Ice Punch, and Switcheroo.
You don't need to run Switcheroo.
I'd say
you don't.
It's not that great, honestly. You don't really get that much utility out of it. I'd rather have like the priority.
Like,
Okay,
don't get me
so-
wrong, it is okay because like if you face a Tangela, then you're automatically
I guess.
kind of struggling. But I think actually Pursuit is what can give Floatzel more relevance in any matchup where it's completely walled. At least like that fast Pursuit is a literal thing that it can do. Then like Pursuit or Switcheroo is like, I don't know, I'm not a fan.
Yeah. Okay, so we can add Floatzel. Like that's a fifth check, but
Right.
remember Floatzel isn't a popular one. Like when was the last time you saw Floatzel?
Hey, you
I don't
faced
think, have you seen?
Floatzel.
Oh yeah, your team that didn't have a rock resist. Oh yeah, that team.
That was
I mean,
day
yeah.
one of Houndoom, okay?
Let's be fun. I mean, there's stuff
Nah.
like Kangaskhan, but like obviously it's not revenge killing it be a priority at full, but it is another like I guess offensive check if you.
Yeah.
And there's like
yeah,
I guess there's
Sure,
like
why
fake
not?
out Kecleon, but like I mean
yeah. No, ain't nobody using fake out Kecleon. Nobody using that.
I actually use that in Vision, but
Yeah, ain't nobody using Kek. I think that was more of a dibs thing than a meta
that's
thing.
it.
Like we're talking.
yeah.
So it's like, yeah, within the realms of the meta, we're talking about 4 main checks and then a couple of other ones. So like, so yeah. If you're talking about popular main checks, we'll have 4 of those, and then we have a couple of other side checks. And then in terms of Scarfers that can revenge kill Houndoom, I personally like a lot the Flame Charge set on Nasty Plot, like a Flame Charge filler, or a Z Sunny Day set, which also boosts speed. So I spoke about this in my post a little bit, but I talked about the logistics of the speed tie between Primeape and Houndoom. And if you wanted to revenge kill Houndoom using Primeape, it's in the favor of the Houndoom user, because if the Houndoom user wins that speed tie, the likelihood you'll have another way of revenge killing it is quite low, and then also like at that point you're on the back foot, right? Whereas if Houndoom revenge kills you, it's just a sweep that got its kill. It's just revenge kills, for example. So if we don't include Primeape, checks to +1 Houndoom are limited to like Swanna, Manectric if it's low enough, and what's the other one? Dodrio.
Yeah. Scarf Scythe is
So-
Scarf Scythe is the thing.
We talked about Lycanroc in priority, so we ain't nobody using Scarf Lycanroc.
Oh,
I mean,
I thought we were considering, like, okay. I see
No,
what you're
specifically Scarfers, but like I really do hate trying to when you have to revenge kill like at base 95 speed Mon and it's like just Scarfers. Really, God, that pisses me off.
Yeah, 100%.
Well,
Yeah, and
It was kind of the same with Jinx and Togue, though. Like,
The thing
Jinx
is, though-
really
Yeah, but
wanted
Jinx
to
actually
revenge
dies
kill,
to everything's U-turn,
I guess.
whereas with Houndoom, like U-turn is not just the completely free thing you click. Like Scarf Mesprit can't just come in and U-turn on Houndoom. It's like, well, I'm okay now.
yep. And also the thing with Jinx is that you had that 320 base Scarfer that was on basically 30-40% of teams. Like Togedemaru was such a big part of how Jinx was good, or like not very good in the meta before, and then when Jinx, what's it called? When Togedemaru was sort of discovered, I guess you can say, Jinx became notably worse. Like it was, I remember it was like at the point where people were saying, "Hello, this is a broken mod. This is kind of stupid. Maybe suspect it." Type of discussion, and then it turned off from that when we had Togedemaru came in such a big way, because at that point there's nothing Jinx can do. If it's Z Lovely Kisses and Togedemaru comes in, and then Togedemaru comes in afterwards, there's no way Jinx can do anything to it. Like it's never going to be outspeeding Togedemaru. So I don't think the Jinx comparison is necessarily valid, both from a defensive standpoint and like a offensive standpoint. Houndoom is just better.
I mean, would you guys consider Rotom Frost
Yeah.
as like a Scarfer that could revenge kill?
Yeah. No. Not revenge killing
Does
stuff.
anyone use Scarf Rotom Frost? Like,
I saw it the other
genuinely,
day.
I've
Yeah.
seen
People use it.
I've seen it twice. I've seen it twice. Once in a tournament, and I'm talking like last 6 months. So, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see it. I see like ICMZ obviously.
I think it's
But,
really-
Yeah, if you involve yourself with Scarf Rotom Frost, you have to then take into account Scarf Kabutops. But as I said before, like if you're trying to revenge kill it and Houndoom Flame Charges on a sack, for example, that then you create a bunch of 50-50 dynamics, and you're never winning. Basically, you're never winning if you have a Houndoom that's 317 speed and it's got +1 on. You're not winning with any of the checks that are slower than it. So again, you're refined to those Scarfers, primate and upwards essentially in terms of speed.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say Flame Charge is too like in the meta at the moment. It's kind of, it isn't hard to justify running, but it's just that there's so many other sets that are better and fourth move slots that are better. But I see what you mean. Like, you really like Flame Charge, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's not just Flame Charge though, because if you run Z Sunny Day, for example, like that gives you all the utility that you'd get from Flame Charge, but you can also run Solar Beam as well. So, for example, if you play a team that's Poliwrath dependent as your check, or Regirock dependent as your check, Z Sunny Day becomes infinitely, like, it's by far the hardest Houndoom check to set to really like truly take on. It's very Pyro-esque in that way. I think you can compare it. The comparison with Pyro with the Z Sunny Day set is actually, I think, very close, because you have the ability to just go for Sunny Day and then click Fire MZ nuke and then just destroy the Hitmonchan. The Hitmonchan won't exist after that. Or you have the option versus faster team to just click Z Sunny Day, and then you have Fire Blast, Dark Pulse, and Fire Blast is boosted by Sun, and then Solar Beam obviously is a really powerful coverage move. You can click any of those buttons, and that's really scary. Like, nobody's trying to mess with Houndoom at +1 speed in the Sun, you know. So it's like, it's there's a dynamic there, and I think if the meta were to become more old, like if Houndoom were to stay, that set would definitely grow in prominence. But I think people are mainly focusing on the either the niche sets, like the spec sets or the scarf sets, or they're just going for the standard nasty plot set and then trying to.
I would not call specs
I don't think
niche.
so.
I think specs is a
really
very legit
I would
set.
say it's in like the top 3. It would be the Pursuit.
Oh yeah, I think in the general terms of the meta, like,
then it'd be specs.
in the general terms of the meta though, I think I've seen specs probably the least and nasty plot the most, and then putting Pursuit somewhere in the middle. And then like weird scarf sets and some toxic sets that we won't talk about. But
I mean, for me, I feel like setting up having nasty plot and like the Sunny Day set, for example, like I feel like it's just really hard to like click. So like, say you want to set up Sun, right? Like, I feel like it's gonna be very hard in that game to set up both. So like, that's why I usually drop nasty plot for like some like other utility option, and I think that's what most people do. Cause like,
100%. Yeah, 100%. Like, I don't see your point, because at the end of the day, if you're clicking nasty plot, the only reason you'd click nasty plot as opposed to clicking Fire Blast twice, which does the same damage, is so that you could get the Z move nuke off. So you'd have to be threatening something specific. So for example, a Lantern or a Regirock that you could really abuse that +2 Z move on. That would be a scenario where you go, okay, that's where you click nasty plot.
Mm-hmm.
But in the scenarios where you don't have a Lantern or you don't have a Regirock on the other team, you just click Fire Blast twice or Dark Pulse twice. Like, there's no other reason in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, my point was mainly that like it's just kind of hard to set up one or the other.
You can set up one. I think we've proved in the past that you can have a one that's infinitely frail. Like, for example, I'm sure you know, like in Oras PU, we had Linoon, which you could not set Linoon up for the life of it on its own. Like, just using its offensive pressure, you could not do it. But if you had screen support or a parting shot, well, in this meta, you'd have a parting shot support, or anything that you could get momentum on. Add onto that Houndoom's typing allows it to set up on both the S ranks. Well, I say both the S ranks, Mesprit and Frostlass. It can pro step on a Lotus Slash, anything that really offensively pressures, on top of the potential structures that you can give it. I don't think setting up is an issue for it. It's more so the once it's set up, how are you going to deal with it?
Yeah,
Well, I think it goes back to all the offensive pressuring ways.
It goes back.
Exactly.
It goes back to the offensive pressure, and it goes, what's our defensive checks? Like, what do we have for it defensively? And then I think in my post, like I detailed that there are no defensive checks. Like if we're being serious, there aren't anything that you'd come in and you'd say, yeah, that's a Houndoom check. Like you're safe versus Houndoom if you have that on your team.
I mean, well, that's
I would want to hear like the defense, because I know that you and TJ, when you guys were talking on like Discord or something, you guys were talking about defensive checks, and I don't think the convo really went anywhere. If you guys want to touch on like the whole defensive checks thing.
I mean, there's like what, 3? There's Polygraph if you're not including Untier. There's AV, Alola Rat, and then there's like and then
okay.
TJ, your whole mic is breaking up a little bit. You said Poliwrath and AV Alola Rat? I'm not sure if I heard that.
Yeah,
And
so it's like, and Carbink, and like all E-rank Pokemon that, like, I've seen Dibs using like Monferno and shit, but like,
yeah.
I think Pignite was another one that you mentioned, and
Yep, that's another one I mentioned in my post.
Mini Hydreigon, and then I don't know. I've been trying to like, I guess think of new like Houndoom checks. Like, I've actually been trying to use like AV Throw recently, and it's like a
AV Throw is an interesting one.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I think Houndoom's hard to check defensively, but I think people slightly overrate that. Like, you can never use the random mons that will like die to a +2 Darkinium Z move or something, but like otherwise like can actually take a single hit. I don't think that's completely irrelevant. Like, when you use this thing practically, yeah, you can actually force out a Houndoom with a Regirock or something. It's not always going to be completely worthless. Houndoom doesn't absolutely brick the entire meta. That doesn't mean it's not amazing or that I'm not leaning ban, but I think that's important because some people do genuinely see, like, well, in like a 1v1 scenario, my Mudsdale will beat a Houndoom, my Regirock will beat a Houndoom, or something like that. And I think that is important to acknowledge. And also, real quick, I think when we were listing Scarfers, I think we might have forgotten Kabutops as like a relevant Houndoom check, but that would have been my bad.
But yeah.
But that's not huge.
At one point, I don't know.
I mean,
We talked about Flame Charge.
There's also the Scarf Alola Duck Trio, which is like really bad. I guess like Scarf rocks, but like
I think Evigaro likes that set. Yeah,
I've used that set before, but that was like 6 months ago, honestly. Like,
yeah, I also used that like a real early.
Really...
Yeah. So like in terms of those defensive checks, you said TJ, Poliwrath is a bit of a weird one. Would you say, because there's two of sets that have been popularized are like there's either the Z Soda set, which is actually the set that I saw the most on ladder. Like I saw about 3 of them compared to other sets.
To be honest, I haven't seen one. I haven't seen one at all. I think it's the least popular, actually.
Okay.
I'm with TJ there, but the popularity isn't necessarily the most important thing about this set. Like, if we can point out its niche, if we can see people using it, I think it's perfectly relevant and fair to talk about.
Yeah, and also I think people underrate the Power Herb Solar Beam set, which is.
I thought this was Power Solar Beam. Oh, this was this Z Solar Beam?
You took Z Solar, and you can go.
Either way, then I've seen very little of either, but I think both are notable.
Yeah, so like I think you can go for both, and the difference that makes is that suddenly if you slap Poliwrath on a team, you can't just say, "Oh, I have a defensive check by Houndoom. I therefore don't need to worry about Houndoom." You can't do that. You have to go, "Okay, I have Poliwrath, but just in case my Poliwrath dies, I need to make sure my Stealth Rocker is capable of getting Stealth Rock, and then I have a Scarf capable of eventually killing Houndoom on top of maybe a priority."
Yeah, or something like that.
It's like, yeah, so you'll need some sort of like idea, core, whatever you want to call it, around checking Houndoom in that sense. So it's a bit difficult in that sense to say like, okay, we have Poliwrath, Houndoom is not a problem. Same thing with Hitmonchan. Like Hitmonchan in theory takes 3 Fire Blast, doesn't take 3. Hitmonchan in theory takes the Fire Blast and then can Mark Punch it and then kill it. But in practice, what happens? It just gets overloaded with pressure and gets 3 cured by Fire Blast, and then is pressured out of the game. So yeah, I think Poliwrath and Hitmonchan are in a similar sort of limbo scenario where you can call them Hitmonchan checks, but they aren't really, but they can be.
Houndoom checks.
Houndoom checks, yeah.
I feel like Poliwrath you could just straight up, not straight up, No, absolutely.
I've faced a couple Polyraths on ladder, and I've just straight up pressured them with Nasty Plot HP Grass.
Yeah, I would say people underrate how much damage that you can do with Nasty Plot plus Dark Seed. Like, even on a resist, that's doing too much damage if there's any prior damage whatsoever. So if you're a Houndoom, for example, and you Fire Blast it, the Polyrath, and then the Polyrath doesn't rest immediately, I'm pretty sure that after a couple of Stealth Rock switch-ins, +2 Dark Z kills. I'm not certain on that count, though.
You don't.
And people will obviously change spreads.
And I don't know, like, people could, like, I've seen this argument, like, people are like, you can just, like, protect off the fucking, like, Z move or whatever. So, like, there's that. And there's also just +2, like, Dark Z is not, it's not like a Polyrath. We could even, like, invest in, like, bulkier set to take on. You probably don't need that much speed.
I don't think +2 Darkinium is the thing that's really breaking Polyrath. I think Polyrath is the kind of thing that lacks the recovery and has the immunity to always perfectly switch into specs. So like if you have spec support over a long game, I don't think Polyrath is sufficient. Okay. And Polyrath kind of fits on the fatter teams where you'd want a reliable switch into that kind of thing.
Like,
and then just Nasty Plot HP Grass, like legit, we'll get through this thing really quick. I don't get it. Nasty Plot HP Grass does the do.
I've also seen that like if you're running like shit like Grassium Z or like HP Grass, then like you just become like much easier to deal with. Like I guess it goes back to
the revenge killing mechanics are much easier. Yeah, they're much more in your favor if you're because again you have that weird element. What do you want to use your filler on? Flame Charge or like HP Grass or like the Z Solar area. Basically, in my experience, I have never needed to run HP Grass, although it's a viable option. I've never needed to run HP Grass because +2 Dark Z and HP Grass, they differ in terms of damage on Polyrath by about 0.3 or like 1% or something stupid. I have the calc. Yeah, I just got the calc here. +2 Dark Z on a 252 HP Polyrath, no special defense, does 66 to 78. So that's a big chunk of damage. And the point that I was trying to make earlier is that okay, you hit it once with a Fire Blast, you're not gonna rest on one Fire Blast worth of damage. So you're gonna switch out, and then when the Houndoom comes back in and it nasty plots, when you take the +2 Dark Z, you're dead. That's the whole point. It puts you under too much pressure, and then what's the follow-up move that you can make? Like, okay, let's say that you live on 1% HP or 5% HP. Okay. You might have needed Polyrath to check something else on that guy's team. So, for example, if the other guy had a Lycan Rock and you needed Polyrath to check the Lycan Rock because Polyrath is an equally good rock resist, you will have needed to be kept the Polyrath healthy, but you were forced not to by Houndoom's pressure. Yeah. And it's not like this is a weird set. This is like the most common set.
Can I go in on that point real quick for one point? Because here's something I think people don't necessarily always get on Houndoom. Houndoom has very few checks, and they all tend to be big blanket checks for other stuff. So it's more fair to say that what if your Houndoom is breaking something that then you also needed that to check something else. It's more fair to say that about Houndoom plus Lycan Rock or something than it is for a lot of other mons in the meta because. Well, something like Lilligant, for example. A, you can often revenge kill it, worry about revenge killing it without necessarily focusing on your defensive switching. But B, a lot of Lilligant checks don't necessarily stack up against the rest of the meta the same way. Like, Alolan Sandslash isn't often your sweeper check, if you get what I'm saying. And that's kind of where Houndoom differentiates itself, because its checks are so few and also like intended to be so blanket checky. And so unreliable with how nicely Houndoom can break it down. It's kind of those three things all working together that to me kind of separate it, as opposed to oh no, I needed my Bouffalant to check his sweeper. What's he sweeping with? I don't know.
Yeah. Also add to this, for example, the things that 100% check the Quiver Dance Lily sets. Say for example you're using the Z Hyper Quiver Dance Lilligant set. Alolan Sandslash doesn't take a lot of damage. Beating that set. The worry is that you get the 50-50 wrong with the HP Fire, which is why you have the other Pom-Pom in the back which 100% takes on the HP fire set, or you have a Drampa, which 100% beats the HP fire set and takes no damage from it whatsoever. So the checks that Lilligant has are all more like better checks because they take less damage from Lilligant. Like some take none damage. Whereas if you play a Houndoom and it gets a nasty plot up and you have a Poliwrath in the back, minimum you're taking is 70% damage, right?
Yeah,
so
Lilligant can run 3 attacks, quiver.
Yeah, no, I mean that didn't take into
Run 3
account
attacks
3
quiver.
attacks quiver. I agree, but
Yep.
point
3 attacks
kind
quiver though is
of stands.
I think that's a contentious point, Lilligant 3 attacks, because I think that's the element that gets people a bit riled up and gets people thinking, is Lilligant broken? Because there's Lilligant isn't. I don't think it's like confined. It's like balanced yet. I'd say that you can probably argue that it's broken. So it's like Lilligant itself could be broken. So it's not really a great comparison, but I think it's relevant in the sense that it's arguable that maybe Lilligant and Houndoom are just as broken as each other potentially.
Well, here's the thing that
like
makes 3 attacks quiver entirely different is that it has the harder, like it needs to set up in a meta where it's not as easy to set up Lilligant, in my opinion. And Lilligant is more reliant on not being like revenge killed by Scarfers than Houndoom. Houndoom's a breaker. If your breaker is revenge killed by a Scarfer, that's not as big of a deal as if your sweeper.
Standard, yeah.
As if your sweeper can't get around Scarfers. Z Hyper or 3 attacks Lilligant, it is a great mon. It can set up, it can absolutely demolish teams, but like its weaknesses are, the difficulty setting up and being offensively checked by like Scarfers, which is completely different than where Houndoom ends up. I don't think Lilligant's as big of a thing as Houndoom right now. But that's a whole other topic.
Also, yeah, I was thinking about this like a few hours ago, and I was just going through the mechanics in my head. If you consider, let's say, Aurorans or Jellicent, slower Scarfers and slower Specs breaker mons in the tier, compare them to Houndoom. Houndoom's capability of breaking teams is much greater than any of those breakers, and it has a much higher speed tier. So the opportunities that it gets to break are obviously going to be far higher. So in that sense, Houndoom's a much better breaker than Aurorus or Jellicent or Aggron. The standard slow breakers.
Was that up for debate?
So, no, what I'm trying to say is that in a meta where we're used to saying, okay, we have a wall breaker here, what you do is you just pressure it as soon as it gets a kill. Or if you have a switch in, when it eventually takes down the switch in, or you put pressure on the switch in, like you can just come and revenge kill it anyway. It's not necessarily that black and white with Houndoom, which is why I think it's more comparable to Pyro in that sense. Because it's so fast and it's capable of just being just as good wall breaking wise. I think it's probably better wall breaking wise than Pyro, just courtesy of its dual stab.
I don't agree with that, but I see where.
The thing is in this meta is that Specs Houndoom, for example, like you clicking Dark Pulse on a Regirock, I think at a certain point you can like 2 KO it. I think. Like after 5% chip damage, 5-10% chip damage, you can 2 KO Regirock. What's it called? Pyro.
Dog?
How many more ones did it?
Manek?
Yeah. So Pyro, in that sense, to do the same amount of damage, would have to go off stab and click HP Grass, or on a Z move set. Okay, Houndoom has the option to do anything that Pyro could do, but within stab ranges. Like it can use its stab to do everything that Pyro could have done with a HP Grass, for example. Like its dual stab is much better suited to breaking.
Yeah, okay.
And the thing is that allows you to do is that because you have so much breaking power in between Fire Blast and Dark Pulse, the filler, like when was the last time you complained to, or somebody complained to you, I'm having 4 move slot syndrome with Houndoom. That's never the case. Like you run Fire Blast, you run Dark Pulse, and you have this plethora of moves which are all just as good as each other that you can use to make Houndoom better. Like, on a nasty plot set, you can just put Flame Charge and it doesn't really affect anything. Like it doesn't really affect the dynamic. Whereas, on a mon which is more reliant on its coverage moves, like it gives it so much like bend leeway. It doesn't have four move slot syndrome like Mons of past or whatever. Like it doesn't really lose much by going for this coverage move over this one, or you know what I mean? Because it has the dual stab basis.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else want to throw out some kind of
Do you have anything, TJ?
point smash?
Do you have anything, Specs?
I mean, okay. I think over the past couple of days you've kind of been overrating how you can get the plots up. If you kind of want to, because a lot of times when something drops, we kind of default to all these +2 calcs we see. And I think that Houndoom, it isn't as easy as a lot of people are saying to get to these +2 points.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I'd say very much so that when you have Houndoom, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to set up a nasty plot. That's for sure. But the thing is that when you have 110 special attack, that's equivalent to what Pyro had. Like Pyro had 106 off the top of my head. So that's equivalent to what Pyro had. I think Magmord had a bit more. But what I'm trying to say is that it's not necessary. You don't need to click nasty plot to be able to break teams. Nor is it dependent upon nasty plot to really do damage. Like a lot of people have been talking about specs as well. Like I'm sure I was the one, or I tested specs out a little bit during my my ladder run, and I personally found that set to be pretty good, and that requires no setup whatsoever, and it does basically the same thing as nasty plot. At the cost of being unable to switch up your moves. So
and nosy moves, which is what a lot of people have been like.
Yeah.
You know, when wall breaking, say Polyrath or something.
Yeah, 100%. And when you have when you have specs, I feel like the equivalent Houndoom set is better than specs Pyro used to be, mainly because of that stab differential. You don't need to go off of stab to beat the fire resists, the so-called fire switch-ins. So, for example, on Regirock, you just click Dark Pulse a couple times on it and it's dead, right? Or you do Lantern, for example. After a rock switch-in, it gets 3 killed by Dark Pulse with no questions asked, for example. So what ends up happening, and which is something that I observed on the ladder, is that people default to a say Hitmonchan plus Lycanroc core, right? Like that's pretty sturdy based in theory for a Houndoom. So, but what ends up happening is that you have the switch in and you have the offensive check. The Houndoom gets in on, say, a Mesprit or a Spiritomb or an Aggron, something slower.
Your problem is calling Hitmonchan a switch in. Hitmonchan is a check. It does not switch in. If you think Hitmonchan is a switch in to Houndoom, you're wrong and you should feel bad. That's just that it is not
I would never say that.
Yeah,
it's not.
Hitmonchan gets brought up a lot in these discussions, and it's mostly just no.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on Hitmonchan not being.
Yeah, 100%. So that's the thing. Like when you have the spec set and you have all these Pokemon that get outsped by the spec set, you have the scenario where Houndoom can kill every single one of you. It's just about picking the correct coverage move. And because teams are built in a way where they have designated switch-ins, and that's no fault of anybody's, that you need a switch-in sometimes. Like if you have a Mesprit on your team, you're therefore inclined to have a Houndoom switch-in. Or if you have a Pom-Pom, the next step is that you'll need a Houndoom switch-in. Because if you don't, Houndoom will come in on the Pom-Pom, either through sacks or momentum, whatever, right?
Yep.
And then you get the opportunity to click 2 of your stab moves. Like you can't tell beforehand if they're going to click Fire Blast or Dark Pulse. So you have to default to your switch-in, right? You have to default to your Hitmonchan or AV Throw or what have you, anything like that. So then it becomes a game of, I'm going to attack your switch-in with the best stab possible. So for example, you use AV Throw as your switch-in, just as a random example. I'll click Overheat, okay? Then what will end up happening is that your throw takes 50% or whatever, right? From the overheat, and then basically for the rest of the game, that is no longer a switch into Houndoom. And then whenever Houndoom comes in again, it now doesn't need to click overheat that one time. It can just click Dark Pulse.
Yeah, well, on the bright
Yeah.
side, if they've got a Specs Houndoom, you don't feel so bad about losing your Master Healing Wish. So there you go. We are.
Just to be clear, I only had a problem with the fact that like Nasty Plot isn't as easy to set up as like I think a lot of people are making it to be. The spec set is scary as hell.
I've set up Nasty Plot like at least 60% of the games that I've used it in, and like I've never been
Really?
oh damn, I wanted to have been able to set up Nasty Plot, but I just couldn't manage it. I've never felt that, to be perfectly honest, and I'm not even pairing it with like Silvally, which is a great partner, or even like Persian can really do some work with Hound. Like Nasty Plot core of Persian plus Houndoom, I just realized like sounds great on paper. I'm not going to use it as a point because I have not used this, but I could definitely see stacking 2 dark types when like the former can pressure those. Fighting like that actually sounds kind of good. Anyway, that's not important. What I was gonna say is we're already running into an hour. Are there any major points that people want to like rebut from the other side or just bring up before it gets too late?
Go TJ, go.
I mean, I think we've touched on most of the major ones. I don't really have much more to add.
You're no fun.
Yeah. So I was going to just quickly add that basically my main concerns from Houndoom don't come from a necessarily a playing standpoint. Like I think eventually people will learn to play around it, and it won't be like ridiculous. It's not going to be a thing where if you have a Houndoom, oh, you insta win. Sorry, like it's not going to be like that. But I think the concern that I have mainly around Houndoom is going to be the team building aspect. Like how are you going to take on Houndoom from the team building aspect? Is that going to be difficult without? Like, is it going to be within the realms of the meta to take on Houndoom within the team builder? Because people forget, like, most of the reason why a tier becomes stale or a tier becomes, not fun to play in is because, like, beating everything in the tier becomes super hard. So it's like, okay, so I'm forced into using this, I'm forced into using that, forced into using this. So, like, why, like, what's the point? Like, I just want to use this and have a bit of fun, And you shouldn't be, like, punished for trying to use Simipour or whatever. So it's like
okay, but if Houndoom's not broken, let's not get so caught up in like, oh, I think Houndoom's gonna make the tier unfun that we can't add new mons. Just I want to say that because I have actually gotten criticisms like as tier leader of PU bans like a lot of new shit that just comes in or strongly considers it. Personally, I don't think we've steered wrong there. I think it's all been justified getting rid of things like Aromatisse and Minior, but that is just because we think, it might not be fun, that is not exclusively the reason that we use to get rid of anything.
Oh, yeah. No, 100%.
I think you guys have done a good job so far, honestly, just from like a outside council standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think, the main points have been sort of fleshed out. And I think the key thing about Houndoom is that, people still enjoy the tier without or without it. Like, that's the main thing. And I think, well, in my opinion, people would enjoy it just as much if we didn't have Houndoom, for example.
I don't know, because people are saying that before we had it, like the meta was like really stale and like.
Okay, so the meta's but stale.
People say every meta is stale, even when we've had drops like literally a month ago. I do not. Like it's some people also say, oh, PU's banned too many things because every suspect we've had something gets banned. Like. Yeah, maybe because we needed to ban stuff. That's not a point. Like people are all over with this ban and stale, and I do not put a lot of stock in it. To be completely honest, I'm sorry. I do. It's not that I don't care about your feedback, but I don't get it.
Yeah, our BL list is actually similar to NU size, if I recall correctly. I don't know. I can't say that for a fact, but I think our BL size is actually quite small.
It's smaller
not
than
quite small.
NU's.
Okay, so we have a smaller BL list than NU, which sort of speaks for itself. I think maybe we've suspect tested a few more ones than NU has, but I think that's because we've needed to suspect a few more because we've lost more defensive stuff than NU has in the long term. But yeah, just to add quickly onto TJ's point, he was saying that the meta was. We were saying that it was stale. People were saying that the meta was stale before, so leaving Houndoom. Or like not banning Houndoom doesn't make it any more stale. Just wanted to add to that quickly that stale, I guess you can sort of consider it. It's not like an on and off switch. Like a meta isn't stale or not stale. It's like a scalar or like a scale. Like you have it's stale, very stale, sort of stale, not very stale, not stale at all, and then like you know what I mean. It's like you have like a range there where it's stale or not. So I don't think. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that having Houndoom in the tier makes the tier more stale than it currently is. Just by virtue of like team building constraints and what have you, as opposed to like making it better, like not stale. I think that will come later on down the life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the tier will be in trouble either way. Like, I'm pretty apathetic on what happens on the suspect. I don't think the tier will like go to shit if Houndoom stays.
Oh no, 100%. Because I'll be there to innovate AV Flashfire Houndoom.
No, it's because we'll get Guzzlord in like a week, and Miltank.
Yeah, we'll get some new stuff anyways.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if Houndoom stays.
Although I will say, please don't vote no ban. Like in the theory, we'll get drops. A lot of times we think we'll get drops, and we don't. And if we do get those drops, and it's like okay, Houndoom's okay now, then we will literally just get it back in the meta.
Yeah, we'll just retest it or something. So it's not that big of a deal.
I was thinking that, like, even if we get like shit like Guzzlord, like it would probably be like another good idea if we tested like Samnok just to like add something else.
I have genuinely considered the prospect of doing a double resuspect. Now, do not take this super seriously because obviously there are a lot of things that would need to be worked out with why you would want to do a double resuspect. But like just because we'd played with Houndoom so recently, I wouldn't necessarily want to like devote a whole 2 weeks or whatever to purely Houndoom. Just a thought. I know that's not going to be a clear cut thing.
I would if
personally,
I would support that.
Yeah, personally speaking, if for example, NU dropped us Guzzlord, Dreaded John, whatever, Miltank, if it dropped us a couple of those mons, I know Dreaded John is super popular, but like, you know what I'm trying to say. Like, if it drops us a couple of Houndoom checks, I'd be more than willing if we banned it to resuspect it, because in that case, you have a meta where you have a couple of defensive checks, a couple of offensive checks, more than enough counterplay if you wanted to go down either rabbit hole. So in that sense, Houndoom is much more balanced. Whereas now I'm looking at it and it's just sort of like, you don't have defensive checks, you have to pressure offensively, and then if you don't get stealth rocks up, what are you going to do? Like it does its job as a breaker way better than anything else in the tier.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any final words from the anti-ban, or can we call it a rest an hour into the discussion?
We can call it a rest.
We can call it a rest.
Cool. So that was the only big thing this week. Exhibition ended up having a tie break, and because of that, like the rounds were timed weirdly, so there were no more exhibition games. We'll have those back next week, along with the Houndoom suspect results. So there's only one more thing left to do. Hajad's Gimmick Corner.
Yay.
Hell yeah, dude.
So, as I'm sure you know, I'm not very big fan of Houndoom, but luckily for us, we do have a plethora of other Houndoom sets which check Houndoom. We can use the old mentality of you can use it too, and that's you can use the Assault Vest Houndoom set, which is free to you in the PU Team Builder for a limited time only, of course, until the suspect finishes. But if we unban it, you can use it then. So, Assault Vest Houndoom, people. Do not use that. Actually, it breaks the law. Never mind. It breaks the
AV.
Wasn't AV Houndoom the mascot of the Blame Truths back in like PUPL1 or whatever they were? Wasn't Monster like the manager of the something Blame Truths?
Yeah, I think so. I can't remember that honestly.
I'm only just remembering that now. I don't know.
Yeah, AV Houndoom does indeed break the law, so do not use that.
But broken be broken. So.
But broken be broken. So maybe I'll allow it.
Well, it's not. It's just that it's not broken because you can use it too.
Yeah, there you go.
So does you can use it be broken? I don't know.
You can use it too. So yeah, in terms of actual gimmicks, we have not really much to talk about. Well, I haven't done much to talk about it. If anything, like TJ mentioned this earlier on. Well, before we were recording, TJ mentioned that we could probably mention Avia Lularat has become quite a big thing because of the
quite a big thing in heavy air quotes.
Big thing, heavy air quotes. Yeah, it's a really bad thing. Like I tried it in my Rex laddering session, and as a Houndoom check or an Aurora's check, it's fantastic. But put it outside the bubble of checking Houndoom or checking Aurora's, it is god awful. Like, it does nothing. So
is that supposed to be surprising? Is that supposed to be news?
Momentum on Aurora's and Houndoom every single time.
This is not news, Jed.
Yeah, true. But
you didn't need to tell us that AV Rat sucks. We got it.
But take it outside that bubble specs, and it just sucks.
Course.
It's just so bad. Yeah,
no,
so,
I would never say it's good outside of those two specific things.
Yeah.
It's something though.
Have you guys got any innovations so that I can go through my builder really quickly and see if I have amnesia?
I mean, you gave us what you needed to, but sure, you guys are guests, so you definitely get the opportunity. If you feel like sharing anything, don't feel any pressure. You might want to save those sets for fucking whatever tour. I don't know.
AV wishy-washy.
Moving on, TJ. That's a no from Specs.
God damn it.
I don't think I have anything of my own, but something that I've been using that I got from K-Tut was a Flame Orb Trim.
Dude.
That's its fuego.
Okay, first of all, you took that from K-Tut. That's not yours to share. Second of all, when you get your health decreased by burn, it doesn't activate Berserk.
I've been told it does. Have I been lied to?
No, but he doesn't use it for that. He uses it for the he uses it so you can't status it essentially. Yeah. Like he doesn't use it to activate Berserk.
Wait, you run Flame Orb, so you can't toxic it because it's already immune to sleep.
Or sleep powder it, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's already immune to sleep.
It's basically so like you don't lose to shit like Autono or like basically so you beat stall.
But stall already runs Articuno every time.
And Carbink.
Well, I mean, it runs surf on like this set.
Okay, but so like stall is still always going to be running.
Pharaoh,
I want Pharaoh back.
Make Pharisee great again.
Okay,
but yeah, that's also just like not yours to give out. So Jesus.
AV Wishy-Washy is actually fucking ass.
No.
Yo.
You said it was good when we
God damn it, TJ.
No. I said
I actually
use AV Lapis.
No.
Dude, that breaks the law. You can't use that. I used AV Walrein and it broke the law as well. So
AV Walrein's better. Let's leave Lapras to Perish Trap. It's the best set.
Yeah. In other news, I played against a guy on ladder and he was using a Spadef Macargo, and that actually took me a long time to kill. So, yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of bad things take a long time to kill. Like Licky's hard to break. Doesn't mean I want to use it.
Oh yeah. I couldn't break like this Licky Mom game for anything when I was on ladder. It was like really dumb. I was using.
I played it. Yeah.
I was like, wait, is Licky the sleeper Houndoom check? And then it died the +2 Z Dark Pulse. And I was like, that's not it.
On ladder I played Scarf Executor. I don't know how I managed to knock it off, but I frisked it, and it was a Scarf Executor.
Wait, what runs Frisk without a Lolanegi in the tier?
I don't know how I found out it was Scarf, honestly. I think it might have
Dusknoir?
Switched into my...
Gorgeist?
I think it was Gorgeist, but I saw a Scarf Executor.
Hang on, let me go to Smog Taurus to do it /DS.
I'm already looking at it. There's like Dusclops, but you want to use pressure.
Yes, it was Dusclops.
You were using Dusclops?
Wait, you were using Frisk Dusclops?
Yes,
yeah, not pressure.
It runs Frisk on Choice Banded.
Dusk Noir, Jad. Dusk Noir. That's what God damn it. Alright.
I thought we already talked about Dusk Noir. Oh.
Alright, everyone, you can go subscribe to Specs Jigglypuff at YouTube. Just the site, you'll find it. Do you have a URL or anything? It's just Is it just
I'll
random?
send you it after.
Is it just random gibberish?
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know that yet.
you can go find him on YouTube. Just
Search up my nickname.
yeah, you'll
Just
get
type
it.
up
I
Steve
believe in you. You're a smart cookie because you listen to the best podcast, even though it's been an hour and 15 minutes of this. You can find TJ nowhere. You can go support. You can go support his wrestling career.
Yeah.
Nah, you can find TJ arguing with me in the PU Discord. That'll still be happening.
Yeah, there you
for
go.
Oh,
Thanks for tuning in to another fabulous and lovely and super productive week of Untier Talk. We'll see you next week. We'll have Exhibition. We'll have Doom recap. We'll have Sobble Gang. I don't know. Thanks for listening, guys.